My name is Fahkri. I am the acute physical therapist at Sampson Regional Medical Center, so I see the patients who are in the hospital itself. I've worked here since 2006, and this year, or the past 12 months, have been like nothing I have ever seen in my career, dealing with COVID. So I began to treat the COVID patients in late spring when the hospital really started to see them. And from the start, they were different than most of the other acute patients that I was used to seeing. For a lot of reasons. Some of those reasons are that a lot of times these patients were younger than the patients that we typically had hospitalized. These patients seemed sicker. They stayed in the hospital for longer than we were typically used to having patients stay in the hospital. And so for this reason, when I would treat them, my treatments were a little different than with most of my other acute patients. My treatments would take longer time because the patients would tire out so quickly. So we might move around for 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then they would have to sit and rest for 5 or 10 minutes. So it would take a long time to actually get them to move around and exercise like they needed to. A lot of people had asked me early on, why are you even seeing these patients, from the community? But the reason that they ask physical therapy to see them is because we need to work on building up their strength and their endurance, which COVID just wipes out. And we also need to keep them as active as we can because that helps to prevent them from getting blood clots, which also is something that COVID increases their risk of. And then finally, the doctors and the discharge planners like for us to see them so that we can give them feedback on how the patient's vital signs and just how the patient tolerates moving around, because it's one thing for them to be breathing pretty good when they're just laying still, but life isn't lived laying still in a bed or, just sitting still in a chair. The doctors and discharge planners need to know what happens to that patient's oxygen level when they get up and walk, or when they have to get up and, move around for any reasonable length of time, so that we can best understand when they are truly safe to leave the hospital and what kind of discharge needs they might have in terms of needing oxygen or additional rehab or things like that. So that's why the doctors would have us to go and see these patients. So when I would go into their rooms, these patients weren't allowed to have visitors. So their only interaction was with the medical team that was taking care of them, their nurses, their respiratory therapists, their doctors, with me. And you could just tell that they were so lonely and so scared, because especially early on, no one really knew a lot about COVID. So you just saw these horror stories on TV of, all these deaths occurring in New York and other places. And the patients were just terrified that was going to be them. And so as we would sit there, as they were resting between the exercises or the activities that I would ask them to do, we would talk and I would get to know them, and they would tell me about their families and their children and their hopes and their dreams. They would tell me things that would break my heart. They would tell me that they just wanted to go home to see their grandchildren, or that they just wanted to see, their son in high school graduate. They just wanted to coach, their daughter's softball team, or they just wanted to help their children start a business. I had one person who told me that her daughter cried when she came to the hospital because she had seen on TV that when you went to the hospital, you died, and she didn't want her mom to die. And so these patients, they would tell me, I just want to live, I just want to go home, I just want to do these things. And they were fighting so hard. You know, a lot of the patients did get to go home, and I hope that they are getting to do all the things that they dreamed of, but some of them didn't. Some of them lost their battle with COVID, and it hits you hard. You know, of course, what we felt is nothing like what their families felt losing these people, but as their healthcare team, we got attached to them also. And we tried to be there to encourage them and to fight for them when their families weren't able to be in the room with them. So, you know, I would try to make things as fun and upbeat for them. Sometimes in the confines of their small rooms, we would dance together, or, you know, anything to just try to make them smile and to enjoy things a little bit. But, you know, sometimes when I would watch them struggling, some of the sickest patients, we would be giving them so much oxygen, and yet they still couldn't seem to catch their breath. It was like watching someone who had their head underwater struggle to breathe after doing something as minimal as maybe just sitting up or standing up. And there would be nothing that I could really do to help them. And I just wanted so badly to breathe for them, because the breaths that I were taking was coming so easily to me, and they were struggling so hard. And it's like I just wanted to loan them my lungs if I could, or to breathe for them, but I couldn't. And so as spring and summer went on, I continued to work with these patients. Again, some survived and some didn't. And I think it was probably around July, I saw an advertisement on the news for the clinical trials for some of the vaccines. And it was like I knew I had to do it, because I wanted to do something else for these patients. I had tried my best when I was with them to do what I could, but I wanted to do something more. I believe in vaccines. I always have. I've had enough kind of basic science and chemistry classes to understand the basics of the science behind the vaccines. And so I wasn't afraid to get vaccinated. I knew that by the time these vaccines got to the stage 3 trials, which was what I was signing up for, that they had already been proven safe. It was just a matter of were they effective or not. And so I saw that they were wanting frontline workers, and so I signed up. I didn't know if I would get chosen or not, but I did. And in August, I went for my first vaccine as part of the Moderna trial. So I had my first vaccine in August and felt nothing. No side effects, nothing. I was convinced I'd gotten the placebo. So a month later, I went back for my second vaccine and got it, and my arm had some swelling. I had some redness on my arm, ran a low-grade temp for a couple of days. And so then I thought, wow, I guess it wasn't the placebo after all. But it was a little bit reassuring, because I knew that with the first one, my body had probably never actually gotten exposed to something similar to COVID, like the first vaccine did. And then with the second, my immune system recognized it, fired up. And so it was reassuring. It's like, okay, so now if COVID actually does get into my system, I know my immune system is ready for it. The side effects were nothing that a couple of extra strength Tylenol couldn't handle, and within about 3 days, they were gone completely. And, you know, I went on with life and with treating the patients, and continued on through the fall and winter. And when vaccines became available here at the hospital in December, I tried to encourage all of my coworkers to get vaccinated. I feel like that, you know, it's a very small thing that we can do, not just for ourselves, but for our families and for our patients as well. And I found out in early January, the Moderna trial was unblinded, and I found out that I did get the vaccine. which I already kind of knew that I did. And it does give you a little bit of a reassuring feeling to know that, my body is ready if this virus does get into my system. And I felt like that it was really the least I could do for these patients who had struggled so much. I wish I could have done more. But I guess my hope is that everyone out there would consider a vaccine, whether it's the Moderna, whether it's the J&J, whether it's the Pfizer. Because again, I've seen what it's like at its worst. And I think it's not something that anyone would want to experience or that you would want anyone in your family to experience.